Hello friends, and welcome to the first installment of the Let's Make Materials tutorial series. I'm your host, Brian Venzen, longtime game developer and friendly neighborhood VFX artist, and I'm so excited to be teaching and learning with you today. I wanted to say right off the bat, I'm going to start from the very beginning, covering the topic of materials in Unreal Engine and how they relate to game development, particularly VFX art because that's my passion, but game art in general. And we're going to go real slow, so if you've never even glanced at the material editor or you've been nervous about taking the first step, this video series is for you. In each video, I'm going to ask and answer a few questions, show the application of what we've learned, and then talk about what's coming up in the next video. The goal is to make them short, sweet, and painless. I will also mention none of this is rehearsed. I haven't made anything beforehand, so if I mess up, we're going to be troubleshooting together. And that way we learn. Now the only assumption I'm going to make is that you've downloaded the Unreal Engine and you know how to open up a new project. But if you don't or you haven't, don't worry about it. I'll make a video showing that as well. So without further ado, let's make materials. So if you're new to materials, you may have the question, what are materials? And really materials are a way of defining the surface of an object. How bumpy or smooth it is, how shiny it is, how see-through it is. And in the case of VFX, it can even help define how white-hot your fire is, or how your fire might distort the environment because of its heat. It's really the difference between concrete and marble, or say treated wood and sand or a steel beam. The difference in how they look and feel is really what materials help us define in the 3D space. So how do I make a material? That might be another question you might have. Well, in Unreal Engine, you can just right click in the content browser here. If you just right click, there's an option that says material. If you left click that, it creates a new material here. Now we can't see it because our content browser is kind of crunched, so if you drag here, you can give yourself a little bit more space. Now it named this material by default a new material. And we're going to call this, you can change the name by left clicking on the name. Let's just call this demo _01 _mat. That's what we're going to call it. And we can change that name later if we want to, but for now I think that's going to work for us. So we've created our first material. Congratulations! Another question you might have is, how do materials work? You know, I said they're surface type. How do they work? Well, we kind of have to build one first to really understand what's happening in them. So let's start there next. Let's open up the material we just created. You do that by just double clicking. And there you go. There's our material. Something that's really important for us to do for what I'm about to talk about, to demonstrate what I'm about to say, is to go up to the little preview panel. And in this window, by the way, it's just displaying the material that we're currently creating on some sort of default object that the engine has. If you left click and drag, it'll rotate around this object so you can see. Just by default, by the way, this default object is reacting to the lighting in this preview window, right? So you can see that the surface of this object feels a little bit shiny, right? Maybe even slick, and that's what materials can help us do. But for now, I want to take the first steps of just explaining a couple of basic things. So we're going to come into this window, and where it says lit, we're going to left click it and go all the way down to exposure and uncheck auto. Now what we did there was we told the game engine, don't adjust any of the stuff that we're doing to try to work in a lighting scenario in this preview window. Because by default, the game engine tries to sort of make slight adjustments for us that will change the look of the things that I'm explaining, and I don't want that to happen. So clicking that here will help us. We also should, by the way, if we go up to where it says untitled, which is the name of our map that is created by default as well. If we click that tab, it'll take us back to the viewport window. We also want to do that here in the viewport where it says lit. If we click this as well, we want to go all the way down to exposure and uncheck game settings. It's going to set this window to be very similar to what's going on in the material window here, right? We've removed the game engine's helpful changes to the lighting scenario to aid us in our material setup. We don't want that right now. So back here in the material editor window, a lot of this stuff looks very daunting. There's several pins here that all have these different names, and that stuff is really sort of cumbersome, and I don't want you to worry about that at the moment. All we really want to do here is hold the 1 key on your keyboard and left click, and that will create what's called a constant. And this is probably the simplest data input type that we can create in the material editor window. And it defaults to a value of 0. A constant is just a singular float value, sometimes it's called a float, where you can input any number in here and use that as a data type or a data input to the material. Now why that's important to us is if I use this value of 0 and I input this to base color and I allow the game engine to reload this preview, the game engine thinks a value of 0 is black. And that's very useful to us because in the future we will be using that knowledge to help us create a material. If I change this value to a value of 1 and I allow this to reload, the game engine turns this value to be white, right? And that's really important to us as well, because a value of 1 or the color of white is also very helpful in material creation. If I do any value in between 0 and 1, say 0.5, we're going to get a gray value here, right? And to demonstrate that even further, if you hold down 1 and left click again in this window, you'll get a second constant, which you can do at any time. You can hold 1 and left click 100 times, you'll get 100 constants. They'll all start at 0. But we're going to use this second constant to sort of tell the base material, which is what this is called, that we don't want any of this other stuff playing a role in what we're demonstrating currently. So if we drag off from our constant, if you click on the little pin, left click and hold, it'll tell you place this somewhere in any other node, right? We're going to put it into metallic input, and you can drag off of a constant for a second time and put it in another input as well. We're going to put it into specular. You can drag off one more time, and you can put this into roughness. Right, so now we're not seeing any of that light reflectivity we were seeing before, right? We've removed the base materials alterations to the surface type using any of these inputs. Back to what we were talking about before in base color, because we used a value of 0.5 that is in between 0 and 1, we got a value that is gray, right? So a constant value that is in between 0 and 1 is going to be some tone of gray. If it's above 1, which is possible, say 2, it's still going to be white. And when a value of above 1 is used in other places in the base material, it's going to give us some different results. But for right now, just know anything above 1 is also going to be white. Anything below 0 is also going to be black, right? These values can be negative. You're still going to get black here. So we've learned a constant, which we can get from holding down 1 and left clicking. We can also right click in this window, and we get a whole slew of things we can do in this window. But if we search for constant, right, type in constant, and click constant here, we also get a constant. If we hold down our 2 key and we left click, we get a vector 2. And a vector 2 is just 2 constants clumped together into one node, one data type. Each of these constants are what we call nodes. This vector 2 is a different kind of node, which is just 2 constants put together. Now if we plug this value into our base color by dragging off of this pin with left click and dropping it into base color, we're also going to get black. Now to the game engine, once you get anything above a singular constant, it starts to consider these data types as colors. So in the details panel here, you'll see that it has an R and a G, and to the game engine, R and G means red and green. So if I type 1 into R here, you see that this turned red, right? If I type 1 into green and I type 0 into R, we get green. If I put 1 into both, we get yellow. So to the game engine, once you get above a singular constant, it starts to consider a vector 2, which is 2 constants, as color. If we right click, we can search this for vector 2 space. What am I looking for here? Vectors, constant vector 2. If we click that, we will get the same thing from holding down 2 and left clicking, right? Because to the game engine, this is called a constant vector 2. You did see in that search panel, constant vector 3 is also possible, and vector 4 is also possible. So the game engine, if I click constant vector 3 and I plug in my vector 3, it's going to be black. Now, once you get above a constant vector 2, the game will give you a UI to choose a color, because a vector 3 to the game can be several different colors, not just red and green, but red, green, and blue, and any combination can give you any color, right? Some hue of red, green, and blue, because these values, right, RGB, can be any of these numbers kind of combined together into a 3 vector. You can get any color in the spectrum, right? So if we do purple, we say okay, the base color, once the material updates, is going to be purple, right? So what we've explored here is a constant vector 2 and a constant vector 3. And all of those things result in a color value to the material editor. Let's delete these because we don't need them, right? Constant vector 1, 2, 3. But before we move on to application, I just want to note that in this window, if we wanted to sort of save or denote all the things that we're working on, we could click on a node and press C on the keyboard, and this will create what's called a comment box. In code, a comment is just information that isn't processed by the compiler or the game engine, but it's just for the person writing the code, or people who potentially might look at the code later to be reminded of what's taking place in the code. So if we wanted to, we could comment and say this is a constant, and we could say this is a vector 2. That's the shorthand for a constant vector 2. We can just delete this, if we hold down 2 and click again, we can get another vector 2. So if we press C, we can get another comment box, and we can just name this vector 2. And if we click our current inputted vector 3 into the base color and we press C on the keyboard, we get another comment box, and we can call this vector 3. That way we just remember what it is we just learned. Now let's talk a little bit about application. Because the color of this material is purple, and this material is called Demo01 Matte, if we save this and we go back to the game engine viewport window, which we get to by clicking on Entitled here, it's just a different tab, right? We can get back to the material editor or back to the game engine here. Now if we look at the preview of our material in the content browser, it's purple. Because we've made changes here, the content browser updates the preview of what that material looks like. Now, for application purposes, if we were in, if we go to the Modes tab here, and we drag and drop in what the game engine allows us to use as an object, which there's plenty of in the basics tab here. If we drag in a sphere, that is us adding an object to the game engine. Now if we zoom into the sphere and we apply, we can apply by simply dragging and dropping our material onto that sphere. Now that sphere looks like the material we've created, right? It is pink because our material is pink. And you can see in the details panel of this window, our material name, Demo01 Matte, is on that sphere. In our next video, we're going to add some math to our demo material, as well as a texture map, so that we can learn how to combine vectors and texture maps using some of that math. And we're going to apply our demo material to a particle system, so we can see what that looks like instead of just the sphere. If you like this video, like, subscribe, and share. Follow me at Let's Make Effects on Instagram, Twitter, realtimevfx, ArtStation, and YouTube. And comment below and let me know if this video was helpful. And I will see you guys on the next video.